Hello everybody, my name is Michael Andrew and I'm about to give you your free tutorial on the Nikon Z50. First, we have to give a huge shout out to LensPro2Go for providing me the Z50 used in this tutorial. If you are short on gear or you want to check something out, give LensPro2Go a try. Maven 10 will save you 10% at checkout. Whenever I need a camera or lens really quick, they are my go-to. If you're coming from another system and you're familiar with the basics of camera operation, you're definitely going to want to check out the table of contents. If you hit Control F or Command F, depending on the computer you're using, and type in the topic that you're interested in, if we have that listed, it will jump to that in the table of contents, and you can click on the time code and it will take you to that specific chapter in this lesson. It's a pretty long lesson. Now, if you're a beginner and just getting started, I have to give you a word of warning. This video is only going to teach you about the operation of the camera, and there's a lot of other information that you would need to know to go out and consistently take great images, things like shutter speed and aperture, depth of field. Then we got our composition and lighting. If we get into video work, it's a whole other can of worms, strobes, things of that nature. So I've created another course called the Everything Else Crash Course. It will allow you to learn the basics of photography and take you into the advanced types of shooting techniques, including portraits, landscape, video, strobe work. It's really designed to get you up to shooting on an advanced level as quickly as possible, and I will put that link in the description. In any event, we have a tremendous amount of information to cover, so let's get started. Every time we put a lens on to the camera, you're going to notice this little white mark right here, and there's a little dimple on the cap as well. In order to unlock this, we're going to, when we have lenses, we're going to have to push and hold down the lens release. We just rotate it. And when you put a lens on, you're going to look for a corresponding white mark. In the case of the cap, it's going to be this dimple again. So there's the sensor. I'm going to put the 16-50 lens on. Here's the white corresponding dimple on the lens. And we're going to rotate it till it clicks. If we look underneath the cap, something you're going to notice is it has the filter thread size, 46 millimeters. So every time you want to put an ND filter or a polarizer or something on your lens, this is how you find it on most lenses, is look under the cap. Another thing I need to point out is that there is a locked mode for the lens, and there's a white dot on top of it. And the camera really isn't going to work until you rotate out of that and get to at least 16 millimeters, and then you can obviously change the focal length. It's a must-have lens, the 16-50 on the Z50, because it's really the only one that does native focusing at the time of this recording in that focal length range for this APS-C camera in this form factor. It's really small. It's a very compact, light setup. Next, we're going to put the battery and the memory card in. And to do that, we're going to look underneath the grip. There's a little release here. We're going to push that down and it'll open. You'll notice we have these pins on the battery. The easiest way to remember is think pins towards the camera. And we're going to put that battery in until it clicks. If we want to remove the battery, we slide this orange lever over to the right, pops right out. In regards to memory cards, I'm a big fan of the SanDisk Extreme Pros, and there's some web pages. There's a guy named Alik Griffin who will do memory card tests for your camera. SanDisk Extreme Pros almost always end up in the top. You don't want to use a memory card just laying around your house, because we're going to need a sustained write speed of a certain amount of data, and that is designated with this U3 symbol. So anytime you see that U3 symbol on a memory card, that means it's designed to work with 4K video. Again, pins on the back of the camera, and we are going to face them towards the camera. Now, because I know I'll get this question, is about UHS 2 memory cards. You'll notice a second set of pins there. These will work in the Z50, but you won't gain a speed advantage. So UHS 1 is absolutely fine, and they are compatible with UHS 2, just something you should know about. Next, let's take a quick tour of the camera so I can show you what each of these functions and buttons are. Also going to point out some things that you should know about when you're first getting started. Again, on the top of the lens, we have this locked dot indicator on the 16-50. This is the locked position. This is the open and ready position. Probably the most important button is the shutter button. It's right here. You'll notice that the power button surrounds it. So every time we want to turn the camera on or off, we just rotate this to on. Something I love about Nikon cameras is that the grip is nice and meaty. It's beefy, but we can also turn it on as we're grabbing it out of the camera bag. It's very useful. The shutter button has two positions, and this is something that all beginners struggle with when they first get started. The first is a halfway depression, and every time we want the camera to engage its autofocus, we want that halfway depression. So it's going to be really useful if you have your camera in hand, push that shutter button halfway down. It feels like a click, like you've come to the end. And then when you want to take the picture, you're going to push it down all the way. You can hear it. Very wise to train your finger to feel the difference between those two positions, because sometimes you are going to want to focus the camera before shooting. And I'll show you a couple techniques when we get into the focusing lesson. Just in front of the power switch and the shutter button, we have a rotating dial on the grip. The main dial, I like to refer to this as the primary selector for a very good reason. And in the back, we have a rotating wheel for our thumb. And I like to refer to this sometimes as the secondary selector. We are going to use the primary selector and the secondary selector to change critical shooting settings like our shutter speed and our aperture. Something you'll notice just behind the shutter button are these three buttons here. The one with the red dot, you can probably guess that's the start and stop video recording. We have our ISO button, which allows us to change the sensitivity or the boost that we're giving to the sensor. And then we have the exposure compensation button, and I'll be pointing out how to use these buttons a little bit later. This rotating wheel with all the letters on it, very important. This is your camera's mode dial. It basically gives the camera instructions in terms of what it is doing to help us when we are shooting. We'll go through each of these in just a second. Some of these you're never going to need or want, like the scene mode. I'm not really a big fan of it, or the effect mode. I think they're kind of gimmicky. If you're just getting started and you're intimidated, start off on the program mode, but I'm going to encourage you to try to focus on the aperture priority mode. In this green mode here, is the auto mode. I call it the dummy mode because the camera is going to be doing everything for us. By the way, you'll notice this little white tick mark. This is pointing to the mode that we've selected. So we're going to have a lesson starting on aperture priority mode. To the right of that, we have a switch that allows us to tell the camera whether we are on a stills mode or a video mode. So when we want to do video recording, we'll flip that over. When we're shooting stills, we'll flip it up. We have our hot shoe. This is where we are going to connect an external speed light for strobe shooting. Even though we have one built in, there's a little switch here on the side of the camera that when you push it forward, it's going to pop up a small built-in flash that can be really useful if you have nothing else. It's kind of a small flash, hard light, but if you're shooting in backlight and you really don't have anything else, it can really save you. On the inside of the grip, kind of hard to see, we have two function buttons, function 1 and function 2. Those can be customized, so as you're holding the camera, you can reach in and press them. It's very ergonomic, it's very useful, highly customizable. And on the other side of the camera, we have our lens release, which we already talked about. If I want to take this lens off, I pretty much have to push this down and rotate those two white dots until they line up. On the left side of the camera, as we would hold it, you're going to notice we have these two rubber gaskets. The top one covers the microphone port. Critically important when recording video that we use an external microphone if you want to have good sound. Bad sound will really, it'll ruin a video. And underneath the bottom one, we have an HDMI out, and we also have a USB terminal. No headphone jack on the Z50, and that's common in this range of cameras, so it's not something that we haven't seen before. Another very common question I get is about changing the display of our information on our back monitor, and there's something a little bit unique and different that I've not seen on another camera. It's a dedicated touch screen button, and that's what these icons over on the far right designate. So the display button here is here on the bottom screen, and as we touch that display button, we're changing our display options. As we toggle through each of them, we can determine if there's more information or less information. There's our histogram, here's our level, here's our white screen, I like to call it. You can change the color of it by calling it our white information screen. And by continuing to push on the display button, this is how we toggle through each of these items. You'll also notice that we have a magnifying glass. So if we were to play an image and we were to zoom in, we can zoom in by pressing on the magnifying glass. We can zoom out by pressing on the minus magnifying glass. We get these options here. I think the touch and drag is the way to go when we're navigating or double tapping. You can use your fingers as you would on a smartphone to zoom in. I think this is more intuitive, but if you prefer using the the magnifying glasses, this is the way to go. You'll also notice that we have this question mark icon. So when we are in the menu systems, so when you find a menu item that doesn't have any information and you want to be prompted in terms of, "Wait, what's this setting I'm changing?" Right here, it'll tell you. Sometimes the language isn't exactly clear, but it can be very helpful sometimes. One of the most common questions I get from pure beginners is like, why is my screen dark? And that is this monitor toggle switch over here, which allows us to control whether we're displaying on the back monitor only, whether we're displaying only in the viewfinder. And that's usually what happens is they bump the switch and this monitor doesn't come on. And they wouldn't know unless they're looking into the EVF. Or to put it in an automatic mode, which would automatically shift when you raise the camera to your eye. So you'll notice there's a little switch right here. When I get close to it, you can see the camera's turning it over to the EVF. That's basically a battery saving option. So if you're shooting through the EVF, it's going to save by turning the back monitor off. Sometimes this can be a problem. For example, if you're shooting on a gimbal, which is a handheld steadying device, the gimbal sometimes will have an attachment that's too close to the EVF and it will trigger this so you can't see what you're shooting. And in those cases, you just come to monitor only and it wouldn't shut off. To the right of the viewfinder, there's this little knob here and that rotates to the right and left. This is the diopter adjustment. This is extremely useful if you wear corrective eyewear, which I do, and it allows us to adjust the focus looking through the EVF. On the back of the camera, we have the AEL, AFL, which stands for Auto Exposure Lock, Auto Focus Lock button, which allows us to lock focus or exposure, and we can also customize this. Very useful if you do back button focusing, for example. And I'll show you how to set those custom buttons up a little bit later. We have this round button here. It's the directional pad. It allows us to move the focusing square left or right, up and down. When we're using the back monitor, obviously we can touch, but when we're looking through the EVF, we're going to want a way to change our focusing square easily and predictably. It's a great way to do it. And you'll also notice that when I touched the monitor, it focused and then took the picture. That is your touch shutter. We're going to turn that off because it'll drive me crazy. And there it's telling us it's turned off. So touch shutter autofocus is off. That means that when we touch the screen, nothing's going to happen. If we have the touch shutter to autofocus on, it'll focus and take a picture. The one that we want is touch AF on. This is a great way to do it because touching on the monitor is a very fast and easy way to change our focus. We'll be talking about that a little bit later. Just below the directional pad, we have the I, which stands for info button. We also have a corresponding I on the touch monitor. Those are going to pull up the same menus. Gives us 12 options that we can access really quick. To the right of that, we have the deep menu button. Really awesome that this is navigatable with touch control. So this is the way to do it. If you're navigating the deep menu, definitely use the touch control, touch something to get into it. You can jump back out. We'll be talking about that later. Below those two buttons, we have the playback button. We also have the garbage can icon, which you can probably guess is going to delete the images. Something else I haven't mentioned is about the touch monitor itself is that we can pull it away from the back of the camera. We can tilt it straight up if we want to. And another thing, believe it or not, if you don't know this, you can actually flip this monitor around until it faces forward. It's a little tricky in terms of how to do it, but this screen will absolutely face straight forward for selfie shooting. It's kind of weird because we have our tripod mount, the holds just below the camera. And so when you flip that monitor around, it's almost impossible to get it mounted on a tripod. And even then it wouldn't be useful because the monitor is going to be blocked by how it's connected to the tripod. But hand holding, it would be amazing because you can see yourself, see what it's focused on, check the exposure, check your camera settings. Very interesting how it does that. For a pure beginner to know or have any idea of what all these numbers and letters mean, it would just be impossible. So I want to walk you through what these symbols mean, especially these super important ones on the bottom. This one with the fraction is your shutter speed. Shutter speed is typically displayed in fractions, but we do get the one with the slash to remind us this is how long the shutter is going to allow us to expose light to our digital sensor. So it's the time. Anything with an F refers to the aperture, which is the size of the lens opening, whether it's really, really small or whether it's really, really large. Smaller numbers mean that it is going to be larger, and we talk about this in the digital photography crash course. If you don't know about some of the basics of photography, definitely check out one of my courses or anybody's courses who will get you up to speed on exposure and depth of field and all of those things. On the far right, we have our ISO setting. ISO is technically a boost that the signal gets. It actually happens after we've captured the light. And you'll notice it's on auto ISO right now. We'll be talking about this a little bit later when we get into the exposure lesson. When we look through the viewfinder, you can expect to see these three numbers. In fact, when you look at most modern cameras, you're going to find these three numbers. They're the most important to your shooting information. It's going to give you critical data in terms of, why your pictures are blurry. Well, if you have a really slow shutter speed, that's probably part of it. Or why you don't have enough depth of field. That's going to be your aperture. Touring the rest of this back monitor, I want to take you through this real quick. In the top left corner, we have our shooting mode. We have our touch autofocus feature. This hand with the parentheses next to it is the optical vibration reduction indicator. Basically, when we use lenses that have image stabilization built into them and it's active, you'll see it. This guy right here with the A, this is the shutter type that we're using, and it's on automatic right now. We can also put the camera into a pure mechanical mode, which will use a front and second mechanical shutter curtain. And then we have an electronic mode where we can turn it over to an electronic shutter, and a lot of these will come into play when we're choosing how many frames per second we're shooting. Here we have our battery charge indicator. This is our metering modes. We'll be talking about this a little bit later. In the bottom right-hand corner, 7.9 thousand K. This is indicating how many more images we can take on our current memory card before it fills up and stops working. And in this case, it's recommending that we activate our flash because we're using a slow shutter speed, and it's saying, hey, it's a little dark in here. And you'll notice that once we pop it up, we get 1/60th of a second and the flashing stops. On the top, we have our drive mode indicator. In this case, S is telling us we're going to take a single image. We have our auto focus mode indicator, which in this case is autofocus automatic. We have our focusing cluster. This is the type of square that we're using for focusing. This little icon here, it's like two pictures with figurines on them. That's our active D lighting. That's a contrast control setting for JPEG. And then we have our picture styles, which are essentially recipes that tell our processor how to prepare our JPEGs. We have our white balance, our quality setting, and then we have our I button, which will allow us to gain access to many of these settings to change them. So we can come in here, we can touch directly or navigate with a directional pad. And let me walk you through some of these. So here's our picture control. If we want to set that, we would hit the OK button. This essentially is going to change or shift the types of colors we use. Obviously, I'm shooting in front of white blinds, but when you're outside on a bright sunny day and you scroll through those, you're going to see some differences. And we get these other, kind of gimmicky settings. I never use these guys, but these first ones in the beginning are going to be very important for JPEG shooting, also going to be important for video shooting. In the beginning, I would just say stay on automatic if you're a pure beginner. We can adjust them by pushing down, and you see we get all these options, and it'll give you a prompt in terms of what you're changing: quick sharpness, overall sharpening, mid-range, clarity, contrast, saturation. If you are a pure beginner, do not mess with this. As you become more advanced in learning things like exposure and autofocus, then you're going to want to come back. But probably advanced to expert shooters are really the only ones who tweak these successfully and use them to their advantage. Videographers definitely use these all the time. And what I'm doing when I leave, I am pushing this little I button right here. It's jumping me back out. You can also do it by pushing this guy. Image quality is the instructions we're giving to the camera in terms of what types of files we want saved to our memory card. RAW is the original data as it's captured by the sensor. It's a larger file, contains a lot more information, and is excellent for post-processing. If you want to change your white balance, all that information's in there. Whereas JPEG throws away about 80%, sometimes more, of the data. And the camera's making these decisions in terms of what data it's keeping, what it's getting rid of. And when we have this setting, we can save our RAW files with our JPEG files. So you can see we have a couple different options here. Or RAW only. And then we have these three JPEG settings. And those JPEG settings essentially determine how much data the processor is throwing away. If you were to take a picture on fine and then normal, and you were to look at them side by side, it would be almost impossible to see the difference visually. I've tried it many times unsuccessfully. I can't see a difference. And so some people would ask, well, why would you shoot on normal or versus fine? Why would you want to, have the setting changed? Because the fine setting, the files are a lot bigger. So when I shot weddings full time, we would pretty much shoot on normal. Why? Because we're shooting thousands of JPEG images and those file sizes were smaller. We could get through our workflow a lot faster. And then the basic setting is very high compression. A lot of data is thrown away. If you're confused and you're worried about it, just shoot on fine. If you trust me that most of the data is going to be there, normal is also good. You're going to get a lot more shots on your memory card. Something else real quickly I want to point out is that we don't have to press the OK button to come into the menu. We can rotate this rear control wheel. And we know it's the rear control wheel because it shows us right here. It's this half moon shape. And we can just change the setting without needing to go into that menu. The lightning bolt refers to our flash mode and how the built-in flash operates. We have our basic fill flash, which is super useful. We have red eye reduction, which should fire a pre-flash and help dilate the pupils. We have our slow sync, which allows us to combine very long shutter speeds with a flash. We have slow sync and red eye reduction. We have a rear curtain sync, which means that if we do a long exposure, the flash is going to fire at the end of the exposure. It's a lot easier to see. Typically, the flash fires at the beginning of the exposure. And then we have the ability to turn the flash off, which is kind of silly because we could just close this, or if we had an external speed light, we could turn it off. For now, just leave it on fill flash. When we get into connecting with our smartphone, we'll need to come in here and turn our Wi-Fi connection on, but this is a quick, easy way to do it. Let's talk about our drive modes or release modes. This is what the camera does after we push the shutter button down all the way. So in this case, it's going to take a single frame. We have a low continuous burst or a high continuous burst or a high plus continuous burst. We also have a timer. So in any of these three modes, as long as you're holding the shutter button halfway down, it is going to continue to take images. You'll notice there's a little teeny triangle pointing down here, which means that we can go into the details and control how many frames per second we're shooting in our low burst. The maximum high-speed burst that you can pull off with the Z50 is 11 frames per second in electronic mode. So let's just take a look at that real quick. You can hear that it's on a mechanical shutter. You can hear the shutter opening and closing. And that, I believe, is 5 frames per second. Some of the other options we have in here are the self-timer. Push down again, we have the ability to change how long the timer will last before it takes the image. And then we have the number of shots. So we can have multiple shots taken when the timer is finished. I'm going to come back out to the menu here. As we continue to go through our eye menu, we have our cluster squares, which is essentially how big of a square or what type of a square we're using when we're focusing. Coming down, we have our focusing modes. We'll be talking about those in a minute. Optical vibration reduction, active D lighting, metering, image size. I recommend staying on large. It's a lot easier to go down in size. You can't really go up in size easily. And then we have our white balance. Let's take a look at some of these other screens that we have. And what you'll notice is a lot of the information stays the same. The icons are the same. Let's see if we can get that white screen. Shooting from this information screen on the back can be very useful, especially when, for example, you're using long exposures and it's dark and you can't really see what's going on and you want to see everything on here. Very useful. But what you will notice almost immediately is that this information is pretty much the same. It's the same things we've seen before. Here's our shooting mode, shutter speed, aperture, ISO, number of shots remaining. You can see that it's changed because I've changed the quality setting. We have our picture styles, which are those recipes, our quality, flash control, Wi-Fi. These are all the same that we've already seen in the overlay version of the quick menu. So when I come back out, it's the same as this on the bottom, same stuff, but very handy. But just another way to look at your shooting information. Watch what happens when we change our quality back. So if I come in here, if you want to change something, you got to push this I button first. And we come into normal, watch what happens to the number of shots remaining. Now we're back at 7.9 thousand images. So something to keep in mind. What I want to do now is take you through your first exposure lesson. So if you do not have the camera, absolutely, positively pause the video and go get your camera. Make sure you have it in your hands because this is going to be really important stuff. The mode dial right here, as we rotate it, it gives instructions to the camera in terms of how much it's going to help us. The green auto mode, I lovingly refer to as the dummy mode, it essentially turns the camera into a point and shoot, and it's doing pretty much all of the decisions for us, more or less. You're just pushing the shutter button down and taking pictures. I would definitely recommend not shooting in the dummy mode. And if you're really stressed out, at least start off in the program mode because it's going to give us the option to change certain settings. I want to walk you through some of the other settings that we're not going to really use, and then we're going to get into the aperture priority mode, manual mode. We have our effects mode. This puts these overlays onto our image. They're kind of gimmicky. They're fun to play with if you are bored, on a Saturday. It's something I never use. I've never used these. Just keep that in mind. It's kind of a gimmicky thing. Custom shooting profiles. Say, for example, you do a lot of sports shooting and you like to have your camera set up a certain way for sports shooting. And later on in the day, you may actually have something like a portrait shoot. The user settings allow us to tell the camera to remember the settings we like, and it will remember them. And within those settings, we have a mode setting. So it's telling us that in user one setting, it's on the program mode. That's what those letters mean. And I'll show you how to set this up when we get into the deep menu. Next, we have the scene modes. And sometimes these can be useful if you're really, really stressed out and you don't know what to do. The scene modes are essentially presets that allow us to use the camera in certain situations. You can see as I scroll through here, we're getting different presets, basically saying if you're shooting portraits, for example. So when we select something like the portrait setting, something that's a pain about this setting is that as we try to get back into it, it's very hard to hit. So this will choose certain flesh tones, things of that nature, and it wants us to scroll. Landscape, children, sports, we got macro photography, night shooting, night landscape, indoor shooting. And the idea is that you would just flip it over to one of these icons and the camera would take care of the rest. The reason why I don't recommend these settings is because you can do all the same things if you understand the basics of your camera, including shutter speed, aperture, white balance, things of those natures. So I don't teach shooting the scene modes. And then we're back to the dummy mode. As we get into the camera, the four modes you should really be the most concerned with are the P, which stands for program mode, S, which stands for shutter priority mode, A, which stands for aperture priority mode, and M, which stands for manual mode. The easiest way for me to teach you about exposure is to start on the aperture priority mode. I use aperture priority in manual mode almost exclusively, even in professional settings. And I'll designate, in terms of why you'd want to use one over the other. Do you remember in the beginning when I talked about the primary selector on the front of the camera? Numero uno, our primary index finger. The easiest way to remember this is to think that your primary control knob is going to change your primary setting. So in aperture priority mode, when we rotate that front control wheel, the primary control wheel, we are changing the aperture. There's a bunch of settings changing. We'll talk about this in just a second. But the main thing to remember is in aperture priority mode, the primary wheel is going to change the aperture. There's a problem in that sometimes the camera comes default set to auto ISO and our auto ISO is turned on. And this is kind of confusing because when we come in and we try to change this, we're still locked into auto ISO. It's a little confusing. If we try to use this top button to change our ISO, we can change it again, but we're still locked into auto ISO. We're just basically giving it a range to work within. So I want you to turn off auto ISO, and we do that by coming into the deep menu, green tab, ISO sensitivity settings. Here it is, auto ISO sensitivity control. We are going to turn this off. When this is turned on, you can see that we are given a range that we can operate within. We're telling the camera, hey, stay within this range, this maximum sensitivity. Don't go higher than 51,200. If you're using a flash, don't go over this ISO. And also we can select our minimum shutter speed. And what I want you to do is to turn this to off. Once it's off, we have traditional ISO control where we dial in the ISO. This is critical to learning about changing the brightness of our images. So auto ISO has a time and place, and I will be talking about that a little bit later. Now what I want you to do is take your index finger in aperture priority mode with regular ISO and just change your aperture. We're changing the diameter of the opening that we're using on the lens. As we go into very high apertures, what we're basically doing is making that opening very small. As we get to lower numbered f-stops, what we're doing is we're making that opening wider. Now, our Z50, as we look at it, it's giving us an exposure preview. It's telling us how bright the image is going to be before we take the shot. And something you should be asking yourself is that if you are changing the diameter of the lens opening, that should be making it darker, but it is not getting darker. Something's going on here. How in the world, if we're letting less light, when we stop this aperture down and make it smaller and smaller, how come the exposure isn't changing? And if you're paying attention, you will notice that the shutter speed is changing as we change our aperture. So this is the heart of the matter with aperture priority. We change the size of the opening, the camera changes how long that opening is exposed to the sensor. So those are the two primary controls, shutter speed and the aperture, right? I want to show you something else. Take your hand and I want you to slowly put it in front of your lens, just like this, and watch what happens to the shutter speed. Is that as it becomes darker and darker, the camera starts using very long exposures. And if you saw those two tick marks, that indicates seconds. Let me see if we can really cover this thing up. There it is, almost 2 seconds. It's a very long exposure for a still. So essentially what's happening is the camera is constantly measuring how much light is coming into the camera, and it's making adjustments to the shutter speed in order to get an even exposure. This is the heart of the matter with aperture priority. Every time we change the aperture or the light changes, the shutter speed's going to change. One of the most basic skill sets you're going to need as a photographer is changing your exposure. That is a fancy word for changing your brightness. So, how do we change our brightness when we're in aperture priority mode if the camera is changing the shutter speed every time we change the aperture, right? There's a button just behind and to the right of the shutter button. On top of our camera, it's a square. It has a plus minus sign in it. And when we push that, you're going to notice we get this new prompt on the bottom of the box here. Every time we press that, we get this yellow highlight with a corresponding icon. If this is the only thing that you come away from this video, you're going to be well on your way to taking great images. When we push and hold that down and we rotate the secondary controller to the right, you're going to notice that the image is getting brighter. This is referred to as the exposure compensation, which is really a fancy way of saying change the brightness. What I want you to do is to take a picture when it's set to 0, 0, and then press and hold it down and rotate the secondary control wheel until it says +1. Take another picture. So when we press play and we look at these guys, so this is the even exposure and this is the +1, and you can see clearly that one is brighter than the other. Then what I want you to do is to come back in, press and hold it down, and I want you to rotate it in the opposite direction until it says -1 and take a picture. When we play these back, there's -1 exposure, there's +1, and there's the even. If this is the only thing that you learn today, you are well on your way to controlling the brightness of your camera. So you can change the exposure and the brightness of it using exposure compensation and aperture priority mode. That is the short answer. There's a deeper answer to this that I'm going to take you through to show you how this is actually working. What does that +1 stands for? What does it mean? +1 means we're using twice the amount of light as we were before. And where is that twice the amount of light coming from? Look what happens to the shutter speed. We're at 1/125th of a second. And as we come over and we're at +1, we're now at 1/60th of a second. This is what's happening is the camera is making adjustments to the exposure based on the shutter speed. We're cheating the shutter speed in the direction of brighter or darker. If we were to go to +2, you can predict what the shutter speed is going to be. What is twice as long as 1/60th of a second? So 1/60th plus 1/60th is 2/60ths. And if we were to round that down, it would be 1/30th of a second. That's my guess. I'm gonna go up to +2, and there it is, 1/30th of a second. We can do it again, going to +3. If you wanna take a guess, it's 1/30th plus 1/30th is 2/30ths, right? Round it down, 1/15th of a second. Exposure compensation is allowing us to cheat the shutter speed in a brighter or darker direction to achieve the exposure we want. If we were to go in the opposite direction, the shutter speed is going to be twice as fast as 1/125th. If you were to do the math in your head, you would come to 1/250th of a second. That is half the exposure as it was before. If we were to continue to go, it would be 1/500th. It's darker, 1/1000th, 3 stops. That is the heart of the matter with exposure compensation. There's a short answer and there's a deeper answer. If you master that one skill set, you're going to be good to go. Something else I need to point out is that when you use exposure compensation and you push and hold this down, we get these little brackets over on the far right. You're going to see these in most cameras in the viewfinder on the bottom of the screen. And we get these little tick marks. So we got a plus on the top and a minus on the bottom. Those tick marks correspond to the yellow indicator on the bottom. So as I rotate and I go up and we get to that +1, that's the first tick mark, the first big tick mark. And those little tick marks correspond with 1/3 increment changes. So every time I rotate, I'm doing 1/3. And so every 3 is a full stop. That's what it indicates. And we're getting darker. Now we're getting brighter. And that is referred to as the exposure compensation indicator. There is an interesting problem that you have to keep your eye on, and that is what the shutter speed is when you take the shot. Very common for me to get emails and questions, why are my pictures blurry? A lot of times it's because they're shooting, and they're using a smaller aperture, and they get into these very long exposures. 1/30th of a second is a long exposure for a handheld type of shot. You move and your subject is going to move, and that movement is going to create motion blur. If you're hand holding the camera, my recommendation is to sneak a peek at your shutter speed to make sure the camera is choosing something in the 1/100th of a second range. You can probably get away with 1/60th. But if you're just shooting portraits or street shooting or whatever, if you're using a very long shutter speed, you're going to get motion blur unless you're on a tripod. Anything less than 1/60th of a second, you're probably looking at a tripod when you're first getting started. If you're shooting sports, and I shoot sports all the time in aperture priority, I like this number to be 1/500th of a second or 1/1000th of a second because we have very fast moving athletes. So your shutter speed is going to change depending on the type of subject you are shooting. For landscape shooting, you may use a couple seconds. It really just depends on what you're doing. Just keep that in mind. Sneak a peek at your shutter speed when you're using aperture priority. Handheld shots, portraits, start off at 1/100th of a second. This is probably as good a time as any to talk about ISO. We haven't formally addressed it. ISO is a boost that the camera gives to the captured light. It happens after we have taken the shot. And the short answer on this is very high ISOs. I'm going to turn this way up, are more grainy than very low ISOs. You can see that my shutter speed's flashing. Just take a picture here. And I want to demonstrate this. So this is an ISO of 40,000. We're going to zoom in. And I want you to take a look at this grain. It's almost a soft grain. When you use very high ISOs, the cameras will try to soften the image, try to make it less noticeable. But you can see this is kind of a grainy image. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the ISO way down, maybe something like that. Very long exposure. We'd only do this on a tripod. And let's zoom in on that one and take a look. You can see that grain is gone, and we actually have cleaner edges. It's a lot easier to see the definition in the blinds compared to the other one. So this is the trade-off with ISO. As we turn our ISO up, we get a boost of the light coming into the camera at the cost of grain. And as we turn it down, that grain will go away, but that boost will be less and less, and therefore we have to use longer shutter speeds. The first time this clicked for me, I was with a friend. We were shooting a wedding. She asked me to come along, and it was dark and I didn't have enough light and it clicked. Oh, bump your ISO up. And that's really where my knowledge of cameras took off from there. I've just gotten started. I want to give you another example though, talking about this in the shutter priority mode. Different modes. So we're flipping over. I almost never use the shutter priority mode. And the reason is I can do everything else with aperture priority or manual. So the question is, how do we change our shutter speed and aperture? It's different on different cameras, but in the case of the Z50, the front control wheel is usually going to change your aperture, which is changing the diameter of the lens. And the rear control wheel will change the shutter speed. That is the short answer. There's a little bit more of a complicated answer. The way we change our shutter speed is we rotate the rear control wheel. You can see the shutter speed's changing. The aperture's flashing. It's not happy. We'll talk about that in just a second. The way shutter priority works is that we change the shutter speed and the camera changes the aperture. It's the opposite of aperture priority. I want you to pretend that you're shooting a sporting event and you need to have a shutter speed of 1/500th of a second. So we just dial that in. You're going to notice that the aperture is flashing. The camera is not happy. And when you see this, it's essentially saying your aperture cannot open wide enough to accommodate this fast shutter speed. If you found yourself in this situation where the aperture is flashing, if we were to take a picture, watch what happens. Play it back. See how dark it is? What would you do? How would you fix this problem? Think about it. If you said turn your ISO up, you are absolutely correct. You can come in here and turn this up to a point where, here we go. Now we're in business. And you'll notice the flashing stopped. And we could probably even use a faster shutter speed, maybe 1/1000th of a second, and we'll get to a point where it'll start flashing again. So we're using a very, very fast shutter speed. It's trying to open up the aperture as wide as it can. And when it starts flashing, it's telling us it's reached the physical limit of that lens. We would have to turn it up a little bit more, and you can see the flashing stops. And that's how you're going to adjust your ISO depending on what you're shooting in. You want lower ISOs. I usually don't like going too much higher than 800 or 1600, but some cameras, modern cameras, 6400, 12,800, depending on how much light you're shooting in, it can look fine. In any event, this is how we control shutter priority. We dial the shutter speed, the camera chooses the aperture, and sometimes it's going to fight you. I never use shutter priority because I can do everything I want to do with aperture priority in manual. And a question many students have is, how do you change image brightness? In shutter priority mode, it's the same. We press the exposure compensation button, we rotate the rear control wheel. This time the changes are being made to the aperture. It's the opposite of what we just covered in aperture priority mode. We can cheat or shift the brightness with the secondary setting. If you were to take your hand and cover it, you're going to see the changes happening to the aperture. Real quick, let's talk about program mode. It's a little wacky. And by now, if you haven't noticed, is that when we get these gray boxes, this is telling us what we can touch on the screen and change directly. And you'll notice in program mode that we can't change either the shutter speed or the aperture. And what this means is that as we rotate this rear control wheel, we can see both of those changing, but it does so in combinations. So in program mode, we would have to scroll through to find a combination that we kind of wanted, and the camera is going to change both of those for us. Exposure compensation works exactly the same. We can bump up the brightness, we can turn it down by pressing the exposure compensation and adjust the brightness that way. Program mode does a lot of the lifting for you. It's kind of an easier way to get started. If you're really intimidated, you can start there as well and just practice changing your brightness this way. Let's get into the manual mode. Manual mode is amazing when you have enough time. 80% of the time I shoot in aperture priority mode. When I have enough time, or if I'm in a studio setting using strobes, I'm in manual. If I'm in a rush, aperture priority mode all day long. When I shot weddings, it was aperture priority mode because you'd be inside a church, you'd be in the lobby, now you'd be outside all within 10 or 15 seconds. And you don't want to fumble around with your, changing your shutter speed. Let the camera help you out. When I'm shooting sports on a bright sunny day, I'm on aperture priority. Why? Because there's plenty of light. And I dial in the aperture I want. Camera takes care of the shutter speed. It's in the 1/2000, 1/3000th of a second. Manual mode is awesome if you have enough time to shoot, look at your images. If you're shooting strobes, you're going to need to do it anyway because you're dealing with external light sources that are adding to the ambient light. Manual mode is probably the easiest to understand we dial in all three settings. We choose a shutter speed, we choose an aperture, and we choose an ISO. So if I rotate my front control wheel, I like to think of it as the primary, changes your aperture. I can change my shutter speed back here. We could also change our ISO, the sensitivity of it. And you'll notice that we're getting a brightness prediction right away. When we're talking about the exposure compensation indicator in manual mode, as we change this, you're going to notice nothing is happening. The brightness is not changing. And the reason is there is no exposure compensation in manual mode. It doesn't exist because we dial in all three of these settings when it's set up this way. We can adjust and whatnot. When we cover the lens with our hand, nothing changes. The camera is not helping us at all. Let me make a comment about auto ISO. When I shoot indoor sports, I prefer to shoot manual. I don't want anything changed. But there's a problem in that sometimes lighting for these indoor events changes. Concerts, MMA fighting, you got lights coming on and off and on and off, and it just drives you crazy trying to, dial in a shutter speed to match it. In these situations, absolutely recommend coming back to auto ISO. So we're going to come back up to our ISO sensitivity settings and we're going to turn this on. When we turn this on, again, we have our ranges, shutter speed, range, all that other stuff. Essentially, what we're doing is we're telling the camera, hey, I want this shutter speed, I want this aperture, and if something changes, I want you to change the ISO automatically for me. The moment we turn this to auto ISO, we have the ability to control exposure compensation in manual mode. If I'm at this MMA event and I'm taking pictures and it's all a little bit too dark, no problem. Let's bump it up just a little bit. And what will happen is the camera will make those adjustments between shots to the ISO. That's kind of confusing for beginners. It's probably more of an advanced technique. Typically manual mode, we dial in all three settings, but if you go manual mode with auto ISO, now we have the ability to have exposure compensation in manual mode. Feel free to watch this a couple times if you need to, because these are your core skill sets in changing image brightness as a photographer, and you're going to pretty much have this as second nature within a certain amount of time. You'll get used comfortable changing your shutter speed and aperture depending on what you're doing. Conceptually, keep in mind that when we use wider apertures, more light's coming in, and as we use smaller apertures, less light's coming in. Longer exposures are going to let more light in, and faster exposures are going to let less light in. I want to talk about white balance real quick. In the beginning, it's not going to matter so much. I just want you to put it on auto white balance, which is here. We can come into this set. We can see all the different white balances. So A1 is your auto white balance, and you're going to be taking pictures and it's going to be amazing and you're going to be happy with them. As we go through these lessons, I'm going to have you turn off auto ISO, and I want you to learn your camera without using auto ISO. I think camera manufacturers are turning it on by default to try to help the shooters, but what's happening is they're going out and shooting these events and it's all grainy because the ISO was so high. So learn to control your ISO from the get-go. White balance in the beginning, it's going to be easiest for you to keep it on auto white balance, which is right here, A1. When we come into our I menu, here it is. We can come into that menu. We have all these different icons. White balance essentially is instructions to the camera to change the color of what we're shooting in, the light we're shooting in. So your light bulb, fluorescent light, sunlight, shade, all of those have a different color. In the beginning, auto white balance is fine, but what's going to happen is you're going to get to a situation where the color looks really off. It'll be blue or green or magenta, and you're gonna be like, what the heck is going on? If you're starting to get comfortable, that would be the time to start practicing changing your white balance. If you're shooting raw, it's not as important because that color information is retained and you can fix it in post. I hate introducing you to fix it in post, but if you're shooting raw, just know that you can change it later. If you're shooting JPEG or you're shooting video, this is a lot more important. What I want to do now is scroll through the different white balance settings, and I want you to notice how it changes the color of these white blinds. This is direct sunlight. We have these different icons indicating when we should select those icons. Look how blue that is. Purplish, yellow. And we have some of these other settings. The basic idea is that you're going to change it to the icon that you're shooting in. So if you're shooting outdoors, you would put it on direct sunlight. If the sun's out, If you're shooting and it's cloudy, you would put it on the cloud icon. If you're shooting in the shade, you would put it in the shade icon, and so on and so forth. Incandescent light, fluorescent light, flash. We have these two weird settings I'll show you in just a second. That's the short answer. We have the ability to come in and change some of these settings where we have three different auto white balances. I have mine set to A1, which is fine. Sometimes you can't even see the difference between them depending on, what light you're shooting in. You'll notice we have this little triangle here, and we push down on the directional pad. We have the ability to shift the white balance in the direction of blue. It's kind of hard to see the color changing, but as we move this around, it is shifting the white balance in different color directions with these numbers telling us how far we've gone. I almost never use that. Almost never use the feature. When we're shooting in mixed lighting conditions, we have some tools here that are really important. And I'm going to show you preset manual first, and then we'll talk about the Kelvin mode. Preset manual means that we take a picture of something neutral, white or true gray. You can use a bride's dress, you can use a ceiling, you can use a wall, you can use a piece of paper. The important thing is that you're taking a picture of something neutral in the light that you plan on shooting. I do this a lot for video shooting because sometimes you're video recording and you have all these different types of light bulbs and lighting's really mixed. So come into preset manual 1. When we get to this point, we need to go into the measure mode. And I'm just going to push it on the screen and you're going to see this yellow box. It's asking you to measure something that's white. We'll just flip it over here. These are white blinds, and we're going to hit OK to measure. Data is acquired and it is applied to the scene. So now we have custom white balanced our camera. We're going to hit the eye to come back out and we can start shooting. And so now these blinds look neutral to me, and that is how you do your custom white balance. So one more white balance I want to walk you through, and that is the Kelvin setting. There's a short answer to this and there's a long answer to this. The short answer is that when we adjust by pushing down, come in here, we get these different color temperatures. 5000 K. What does that mean? The short answer is this allows us to dial in the specific color temperature that we are using in our situation. Part of the problem with this is it would require you to know the temperatures of certain lights. For example, daylight, when the sun is out, is about 5600 K. You can see it's turning yellow on me in here. Light bulbs, incandescent lights, and things of that nature, those are about 3200, 3400. You can see how blue it gets. And there's varying ranges depending on the light bulbs you're using. So the idea on this is to dial in the temperature to match. But there's another lesson I want to kind of point out here is that as we go down to lower Kelvin temperatures, you see how blue and aggressive it gets? What the camera is doing is applying the opposite to the color temperature light we would be shooting in. Give you an example, candlelight. When you look at candlelight, it's really yellow. So if we were shooting in candlelight, this feature would allow us to apply an overall blue cast in that candlelight to counterbalance it and to make it more neutral and more white looking. I'll give you another example. Blue blowtorch, really, really hot flame. That's blue. So as we turn up, if we were to shoot on a movie set that had blue torches everywhere, we could shoot at a higher Kelvin temperature, which would introduce yellow, and it would balance that out as well. So that's the heart of the matter with white balance, is we're giving instructions to the camera to counterbalance these color shifts that we see. I know it's a lot of information. Kelvin's great if you know, hey, 5600 for daylight. It has its time and place. Custom white balance is very useful. But that is an overview of white balance and what we're doing when we change these settings. But for now, auto white balance is probably going to be just fine. We're going to talk about metering modes, something that's not often discussed, but it's worth knowing. Metering modes is how the camera measures light coming into the camera. So if we come into this metering set, you can see we get these different icons. The easiest way for me to teach this is to talk about the spot metering mode first. Basically what we're doing is we're telling the camera to measure a light from the focusing square that we're using. It's measuring how much light's coming into the camera. And the moment, oh, and by the way, I got a little headlamp set up here. And when we scroll over the headlamp with our focusing square, you can see that the shutter speed changes dramatically. Essentially, metering modes allow us to give a pattern to the camera from which to measure light. And in this case, this focusing square, the moment we go over a very bright light, it changes the shutter speed. And when we get to an area that's, not as bright as that, we get a slower shutter speed. So that's what's happening. In the different modes, if you're just getting started, I think matrix metering works the best. It's looking at different areas of the viewfinder and it's giving, certain percentages to different parts of it and whatnot. I think this is a pretty good place to start. But we also have a center weighted, which is an average between the middle and the outer parts. And then we have something called highlight weighted, which is allowing the camera to measure the highlights. You'll notice that as we get further and further away, it doesn't change as aggressively. So in the beginning, yeah, I would say beginners stick with matrix metering. If you get into a situation where you're shooting heavy backlight and you have like the sun behind a person, come over to spot metering. Probably the two best pieces of information when it comes to starting off with metering modes. When we talk about our camera's focusing systems, the easiest way to think of this is the how, the when, and the where. How, when, and where. If you think of focusing in those three terms, this is going to be a lot easier. How do we focus our camera? Well, we talked about it earlier. It's a halfway shutter button depression. It's that first position as we push the shutter button halfway down. That is going to engage the camera's focusing systems. And in this case, we see this little box turn green. When we're ready to take the picture, we push the shutter button down all the way. Pretty straightforward. The next question is when the camera is focusing. This has to do with the camera's focusing modes. To access our camera's focusing modes, we're going to press the I button and we're going to look for AFA. The bottom right hand corner, it'll say something else if you have it set differently. So let's come into this menu and take a look. We have 4 different options. The first one I want to start off with is autofocus single. And what this means is that the camera will focus one time when we push the shutter button halfway down. After we push the shutter button halfway down and we hold it halfway down, the focusing will not change. So if we were to get a focusing lock, and I'm holding the shutter button down, and as I rotate the camera side to side, the focus will not change. This is referred to as recomposing. It's very common that you might take a focus lock of somebody and recompose them to make it more aesthetically pleasing. So we're changing the composition after we get a focus lock and we push the shutter button down all the way afterwards. Now, one side note about recomposing is that you want to make sure that you have an f-stop that's stopped down a little bit. You don't want to shoot it too wide because if you have a very wide aperture and you recompose, you're going to pull them out of focus. There is a workaround, however, when we are talking about focusing for people, and I'll talk about that in just a second. So AFS stands for autofocus single, means the camera is going to get focus lock one time. Continuous autofocus means the camera is going to focus over and over and over again. It is not a one-time focus. It's repetitive no matter where we point the camera. And you're going to notice that the box doesn't turn green. It's staying red right now. What this means is that the camera is updating its focusing continuously over and over. This is going to be ideal for sports, kids running around, birds in flight, cars, bicyclists, anything that moves, you're going to want to be on autofocus continuous because the camera is going to be updating the focus even up to the moment that the shutter button goes down all the way. This is why I refer to it as when, whether it's a one-time focus or whether it's a continuous focus over and over and over again. Autofocus A stands for autofocus automatic. And what we're doing in this mode is we're giving the camera permission to change the focusing mode on its own. A lot of times at weddings, I used to use this type of mode where if the subject was still, the camera would allow me to get focusing lock. And then if it could predict that the subject was moving, it would jump over to autofocus continuous. I don't really use that anymore. Anytime I'm dealing with moving subjects, it's autofocus continuous pretty much all the time. So autofocus automatic allows us to have the camera help us out a little bit. The last mode that we have is manual focus. And as you probably guessed, that when we turn this to manual focus, the camera no longer autofocuses. Now on the 16 to 50, the focusing ring is closer towards the camera. And I want you to take this and try to rotate it. And you're going to notice that the box is red. And when you get to a point that it turns green, essentially it's telling us that that should be in focus. It's going to be close enough. That's one way you can do it. There's another way we can do this by zooming in on the screen. I love how straightforward it is on the Z50 because all we have to do is push the magnifying glass and it punches in. Push it again. Now we're zoomed really close. And this is something that I refer to as manual zoom focusing. It's very handy when you're getting set up for video production because you want to get a focus lock on something and just leave it there. Very common when shooting certain kinds of video is to shoot in manual focus. And when you're ready to jump out, you can press the minus. Something that's very nice about this is that we can shoot from here, take a picture from the zoomed in position. And another thing you'll notice is we have this little rangefinder feature here in the bottom corner where it's telling you how close you are to focused. So if we were to rotate it to the right, you can see the arrow is pointing us this way. And as we continue to go to the left, at some point we get this little white circle. The camera's trying to tell us that we've manually focused it correctly. Let's jump back into autofocus single. Make sure we get this. We're gonna hit OK, so it takes. We've talked about the how the camera focuses. We've talked about the when the camera focuses. Now we're going to talk about the where the camera is focusing. And this deals with the camera's focusing squares, which I like to refer to as clusters. As you've probably noticed already, we can touch on the monitor and change the position of that focusing square. It's very quick, very fast, very intuitive. As we look through the viewfinder, we can also use the directional pad, which is going to be your primary way of changing the focusing squares. Pretty intuitive as well. When we're moving this around, if we press the OK button, it'll jump back to the middle, the center of the screen. We'll get a little dot in front of it. Let's talk about changing these squares and what they look like when we come into the I button. And you'll notice that we have this little square just above the autofocus modes right here. So in this mode, we have a few different options. And the easiest one to probably talk about first is the auto area autofocus. I'm going to toggle the displays here so we can see this a little bit better. And you'll notice we have these squares, these red squares in the corner. And basically what we're doing is we're giving the camera permission to choose the subject for us. And when we push our shutter button halfway down, we get these green squares, these overlays. Essentially what's happening is the camera is picking out a subject of high contrast. And you can see sometimes it's there, sometimes it's there. And this is why I don't like using it, is because it's hard to predict exactly where the camera is going to focus sometimes. It's going to make, the decision for you, and it's going to be focusing all over the place. So I usually don't use this mode. I usually recommend starting off with one of the larger focusing squares. So if we come to the wide area autofocus, you'll notice that if you sometimes select an item, if you don't double tap it, or if you don't hit OK, it won't select it. But you'll notice now we have this larger square. A lot easier to choose and to see exactly where we're focusing. And the camera is going to look in that area. Pretty straightforward. And there's a smaller square, S. Hit OK. You can see the size of this square is getting smaller. It's very nice. This is a pretty good square to start off with if you're a pure beginner, because it's going to give you pretty good control. It's easy to see. Very easy to move around, know what you're doing. Sometimes these other squares get pretty small, kind of hard to see. So when we go to single point AF, it's there. It's pretty small. But again, we have even a tighter cluster. Very small, very precise. When you're shooting with very wide apertures, it's probably a better one to choose. And then we have pinpoint autofocus. Very teeny small square. I don't know if you guys can see it. It's teeny, teeny, tiny. There it is. And that's the idea of the different clusters, is that we have the ability to control the size of the area that we're focusing in. I've added a picture of this beautiful model. It's going to help us out to demonstrate a feature that's kind of hidden and is very useful. This is the eye detection focusing cluster, if you want to call it that. And it is found, come into our auto area, the main one, the big one. And this is where it's useful, is when you're shooting portraits, when you're shooting people. If we have eye detection turned on, it is going to look for faces. So it automatically jumps to my right eye. We see it from the left. And you notice we have a little arrow there, meaning that we can designate which eye that we're focusing on. The eye detection is a game changer when you're shooting portraits, because we don't need to recompose. We can get our subject exactly where we want them, push the shutter button halfway down, and take the picture. And it's not necessary to recompose. Sometimes when you're in a hurry, and it's not a person, it makes sense to still do it. But any camera with eye detection, it's quite impressive to be able to do this. It's been within the last, 4 or 5 years, it's gotten really good, on all camera systems. Something about eye detection is it wants us to be within a certain range and then we lose eye detection. This is not bad. I'm zoomed out all the way, but you can see it's struggling to jump into it because the area of the face is smaller. And then as we zoom in, now it's starting to get a lock. Something else that's really important to remember is the combination of the focusing mode with the cluster that you're using. If we come in and we go to autofocus continuous, okay, the camera should be updating the focusing position as long as we're holding that shutter button halfway down. So it's an automatic update. Not really something you're going to want to do for sport shooting if you have a fast moving subject, but if you have somebody, a kid that's moving around, things of that nature, this is probably the way to go when you have a cooperating human autofocus single. Something else I want to show you is that when we come back out to the auto area mode, you're going to notice we get this little symbol here that says OK on the bottom of our screen. What that means is that we have the ability to tell the camera to track something when we press the OK button in this mode. This little white box. When the white box turns on, we can take it and line it up on a subject of interest. In this case, this little target over here. Let's see if we get this lined up to demonstrate. And then when we hit OK again, we get this yellow box. And what's happening is the camera is going to try to track that. This is something you're definitely going to want to be on autofocus continuous. Otherwise, you'd have to push the shutter button halfway down every time to get a focus lock. But on autofocus continuous, the camera should be updating automatically, whether we're moving left or right. This is referred to as the tracking mode. And the tracking mode is super useful in certain settings with video shooting. That's really the best time for it. And I'll show you some video things in a second, but you'll notice that as we get off the frame, it loses it. It's like, what's going on? And to reset it, we would hit OK again. Let's try it on the model. And we're back in business. It works better when we have a clean background and we don't have a lot of different subjects walking or moving in front of each other. And that is the tracking mode. I want to answer a question that I'll probably get, and that's in regard to how to set this up for back button focusing. In the beginning, we talked about using a halfway shutter button depression. There are many photographers who would prefer to use a back button to customize it. So what we're going to do is come back into wide area and we'll go to autofocus single just to demonstrate that it's working. There it is. And so how do we remove the focusing from the halfway shutter button depression, this back button only? There's a couple steps that we'll have to do. And we have an autofocus menu. It's in this red tab. If we come in here, there's a lot of different autofocus settings that we can take a look at. Here's the eye detection if we want to turn it off if for whatever reason, or we want to go less precise face detection. But we could turn it off if it was getting in our way and we're tripping over it a lot. I definitely leave mine on. Autofocus activation. It says the shutter button, which is obviously the shutter button, and then the AF on button. Those two buttons will engage focusing. We don't have an AF on yet, but I'll demonstrate how to set this up. So we're going to remove focusing from the halfway shutter button depression by selecting AF on only. And then what we need to do is to come into the controls and select custom controls shooting. What this means is that while we're shooting, we can customize the buttons, which will be different than how those controls work during playback. You can also customize the dials, the eye menu. I'll demonstrate some of those things when we go through the deep menu. When we come in here, we get an overlay of the camera and we can see which button it is we're about to customize as we scroll through it. It's highlighted. So we have some customization options. It's really nice. And for back button focusing, we're going to come in here and we're going to select AF on, and that sets this up for back button focusing. So now when we push this, we're engaging the camera's focusing system, we get focusing lock, and we push the shutter button down all the way to take the picture. So that's how you do back button focus. And I'm going to change it back now because if I don't, sometimes I'll forget and I'll be like, what is going on? How come it's not focusing? Okay, there it is. You might have the question, why would you want to do back button focus? It's mostly a sports shooting thing. And it just gives easier control to the shooter to designate when focus is working and when it's not, just simply by removing the thumb. And when they lift it up, they're essentially in a manual mode and they can fire and the focusing square is not going to be re-engaging focus on something in the background. That's the short answer, is this greater control. Something else we need to talk about real quick is when we're in video shooting. So I flipped the video switch over, and something you'll notice is that we're getting this banding. This has to do with the LED lights that I'm shooting in. You won't see this outdoors when you're shooting in the sun or in natural light. And there's a video that I have is on YouTube called "Why Do LED Lights Flicker?" If you want to check it out. It's causing all kinds of problems, you can see. And a lot of this has to do, well, it does have to do with the shutter speed. So if you see this, turn your shutter speed down to at least 1/20th of a second. Should eliminate most of it. See how it's gone now? 1/25th is kind of okay, but 1/60th is usually what I have for video. And you'll notice it's pretty much more or less eliminated. When we come into our focusing modes, the same ones, we have this different word, which is full-time autofocus. So we have a single, we have the continuous, which we remember, and then we have this autofocus full-time. This is essentially the same as autofocus automatic, only it's for video. And we're giving the camera permission to decide when it wants to focus. If it's a still subject, it's going to stay pretty much still. If we start moving around, then it's going to engage the camera's focusing systems. When I am shooting video, unless I'm standing in front of it or doing a vlog, if I'm doing commercial work, it's almost always on manual focus because you don't want the camera jumping around while you're shooting. And we get this breathing of focus that's very annoying. So, with that in mind, there's your manual focus. Otherwise, I'm choosing one of these other two modes because I like to determine, exactly what's going on with the camera. Another technique I want to demonstrate real quick, I know you guys want to jump into the menu, is using the touch monitor to pull focus. This is best done in autofocus single mode, I believe. It's just my opinion. Is that when we want to change the focus from one position to another, we just touch on the screen. As we had in the still shooting mode, we have the ability to have our tracking. Here it is when we go autofocus area mode. Come all the way out. There's our square. It's going crazy. Jump out of it. And we can do tracking again if we wanted to. I think if you're going to pull focus, which is changing focus by touching on the screen, you'd go with something like wide area, and autofocus single can work. Let's take a look at that. Sometimes the cameras are set up a little bit differently, and we're going to make sure touch autofocus is on. So now we're jumping focus by using the touch monitor. And, even till about 4 or 5 years ago, you'd have to have this whole gear system and have somebody, actually changing the focusing for you. Autofocus single in this mode is great because after you touch on the screen, it stops focusing. If we were to come in and go with autofocus continuous, hit OK, this would be something better for like gimbal work. If we have a camera on a gimbal and we're tracking a moving subject and we want the camera to continually focus over and over and over again, essentially what's happening is it's looking within that box. It's not giving us confirmation, but it's essentially refocusing over and over and over again. And if we wanted to go with tracking, we would set that up as we had done in the past with the larger square. There it is. And we hit OK. We got our box. We can put it where we want, and then it should track and continuously focus. So there's different ways we can focus in video. I know that's a ton of information. We've talked about the how, the when, the where. We've talked about back button focus. We've talked about manual zoom focus. We've talked about tracking and how to pull focus in video. A lot of information, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let's jump into the deep menu system. For the sake of time, I'm going to have to try to keep it to limited. The deep menu system can be accessed by pressing the menu button. And something important to keep an eye on is that you'll see a little colored line here. And that color designates a certain set of information. Blue is for playback. We have this green, which is for stills shooting. And then we have a lighter green. It's very difficult to tell the difference sometimes. It's a movie shooting. Then we have this red, which is the custom settings menu. We have orange, which is the setup menu. And we have a purple, which is retouch. And then we have a gray, which is a customizable menu, my menu. We also have additional pages when you see a scrolling bar over to the far right here. So if you don't see that, we have a single page. If you see that, we have multiple pages. I personally prefer to navigate with the touch screen. I'm not doing it now, so you guys can see what's going on. I'm right-handed. But something I want to point out is that when you're in these multiple page tabs, you can touch and swipe. This is, I think, faster than playing this game. You know, uh, obviously it's yellow where we are. This designates our current position in the menu. We can press OK or push to the right to enter that. And there's usually a reverse, or we can push to the left. Here's the reverse icon. And what I wanted to do real quick is briefly go over the most important menu items. I can't go into the philosophy of use and all that just for the sake of time. I just wanted to give you a quick overview at least. So anything in the blue menu deals with playing the images back. Obviously, we have the garbage can icon to delete. We can determine which playback folder we want, whether it's all the folders we currently have or a specific folder. We have playback display options is when we play an image back. What other types of information do you want to see? Shooting data is something that I think it's pretty important. We go to RGB, highlights, exposure. We'll just select all of them. Do you want to save the changes? Yes. This happens a lot. Is that you'll select items, and if it's not saved, it won't remember, and you'll be like, "What happened?" So let's play an image back. When I push up on the directional pad, you can see these different sets of information, and this is what we were designating in the display playback options: is which of those screens do you want to see? Do you want the ability to review images? Monitor only. So when it's on, it'll do both here and here. And what this means is the automatic display of the image after you take it. Sometimes that's annoying, especially when you're, shooting sports. So if you want to turn that off, you would come in here and turn off. After delete is asking, what do you want to see after you delete the image? Do you want to see the previous image? Do you want to see the next image? Or do you want to continue as you were before? Pretty straightforward. We have the ability to rotate automatically. So if you're shooting in landscape mode, the image would rotate all on its own. We can create a slideshow. We used to do this at weddings, is that we would connect our cameras to TVs and we would play the images from the day right out of the camera. And this allows us to set this up. We can determine what types of images we want, whether it's stills and videos or both. Do it by rating. How long do you want that image to show? 2 seconds is a little quick. Usually it's 3 to 5 seconds. And so what we would do with the slideshow, if you did this, you would connect with the HDMI cable to a television, and then you could play the slideshow straight from your camera. Image rating allows us to choose different images, and pressing up or down, we can assign a star 1 through 5, and that would be respected when we pulled it into Photoshop or Lightroom. They should be automatically rated. So that's the blue tab. Photo shooting menu deals with stills. So we can reset everything in this shooting menu if we wanted to. We could designate which storage folder we want to shoot in. We can rename them. We can select a folder. And if you come in here and change the number, you're creating a new folder within your memory card. Sometimes this is useful if you have multiple shoots in a day. We can also select which card we want to record to. We have the ability to designate 3 letters of the file types that we're shooting in. So if you want to have something a little bit more custom, you could do that. Typically, I recommend shooting with the full part of the sensor. It's a crop sensor, so it's not full frame, but the entire sensor is going to be the part that I would recommend. We can always crop afterwards. It's not easy to go from a smaller image to a larger one, so I just recommend leaving it on DX mode. Image quality deals with RAWs and JPEGs. We talked about these a little bit already, and this is the deep menu option to select them. Image size, again, for beginners, I recommend going with the entire sensor. In this case, it's going to be the large, obviously. And then we have the ability to change between 12-bit and 14-bit RAW recording. I just recommend if you're going to be shooting RAW, might as well go 12-bit. It's more information in those files. ISO sensitivity settings allow us to designate the ISO from a list if we wanted to. I don't think there's a reason to come into the menu to do this, but the auto ISO sensitivity control is if you have this turned on, you might want to set a limit in terms of how high that ISO can go if the camera is going to be choosing. I only use auto ISO under certain circumstances, so I leave mine turned off. White balance is the same as we saw in the I menu. It just gives us a deep menu way to choose these options, and you're going to see we have the ability to adjust just like we did. You can see the color gamut swatch a little bit better. Set picture control. Picture control is the recipe that we're telling the camera to follow in terms of how much information to throw away and what to keep. Set picture control allows us to tell the camera what types of information to keep and what to throw away when we're creating JPEGs. In the beginning, again, auto is what you're going to go with. If you shoot portraits, you might want to come down and try portrait. Essentially, this is for JPEGs. In the creation of JPEGs, there's a lot of information that's thrown away, and we're essentially telling the camera what to stick with. Now, we have the ability to change those settings, and this is not something I would recommend for pure beginning or intermediate photographers. We could come into one of these picture controls and then change the sharpening, the clarity, the contrast, the saturation by coming in and moving these sliders to the left and right. It's not something I recommend, and just leave it the way it is for now. Videographers who are recording will often tweak these settings to a huge degree. You know, they want to get certain profile, certain look, and it makes more sense for video shooters because they're trying to get it right in camera. They can't shoot in raw, you know, in terms of the basic camera. There are some cameras that you can, you know, record ProRes raw. For example, Z6, Z7. If you have an Atomos Ninja recorder, you can shoot raw, and then it's not as important. But for video shooting with the camera only, and you're doing high-end work, sometimes it makes sense to tweak those picture controls, and we'll talk about that when we get into the video shooting. Color space is going to be sRGB unless you shoot for a magazine and there's a specific reason you want Adobe RGB. Active D lighting is an automatic contrast control. In the beginning, automatic makes sense to me. This is going to only apply to JPEGs. Some people turn it off, but I think it looks great. This is just a touch contrast. I typically add a little bit of contrast in post anyway to my JPEGs, and so this kind of saves me an extra step, but that's just me personally. Long exposure noise reduction is when we're dealing with exposures of over a second. The processor will go in and try to clean up some of that noise. I have it turned off by default, and the same applies to high ISO noise reduction, but this one I leave turned on to normal because when you get into very, very high ISOs, you do want some cleanup. A lot of this is preference. Vignette control deals with wide angle lenses. We get a darkening in the corners. It's kind of hard to see, but if you look in the corners, they're just a little bit darker. And the vignetting control tells the camera to clean that up. When we're taking the pictures, there's a lot of activity going on behind the scenes in terms of lens cleanup, and the vignette control handles the darkness in the corners with wide angle lenses. Diffraction compensation is sort of a new feature we've seen within the last couple years, and this allows the camera to add essentially a little bit of sharpening when we are stopping the aperture way down, you know, really, really small, and diffraction starts happening. You can turn it on if you want, if that's your preference. And then we have auto distortion control. We have a, you know, question mark. It requires certain lenses, so this is why it's grayed out. We don't have that ability. If we had a really wide angle lens with you know, heavy distortion and it has that CPU chip, then this would turn on. Flicker reduction shooting is when we're dealing with lights, sodium-based lamps, sometimes fluorescent lights. You'll get this flickering, and the exposure will be changing between shots. So if you turn this on, the camera will figure out the pattern of the flickering and allow you to shoot in a way that the exposure is consistent. One of the problems with this is that when you turn it on, sometimes the camera will hesitate in those situations, so I usually leave mine turned off. Metering we've talked about. This is how the camera is measuring light as it enters the lens. These are just different places we can select it. Flash control, we're talking about the built-in flash, this little guy. TTL stands for through the lens metering. And what this means is the camera is going to fire a pre-flash, measure the light in the scene, and then it'll fire the main flash immediately after. It happens so quick we can't even see it. Sometimes you are going to want to go with just manual flash, and this is a power setting that we just dial in and it fires one flash. But if you're just getting started, TTL, when using this little guy, is probably the way to go. We have the ability to change different modes. There's a fill flash, red eye reduction, which is going to try to dilate the pupil of your subject by firing another pre-flash. We have a rear curtain sync, which means that the flash would fire at the end of the exposure. And we can also turn the flash off, which is kind of funny because you could just close this and you wouldn't have that problem. Flash compensation means flash brightness. So when we're shooting with TTL or with our manual flash, we can increase the brightness by pushing up. We can decrease it by pushing down. 0 is an even exposure, and that's what the camera is going to try to get us to. The release mode are also sometimes called the drive modes. We've already talked about. We have our single frame. We have the different continuous frames. We have the 10-second timer, very useful when shooting group pictures. The focusing modes we've talked about. It's the when the camera is focusing. The cluster modes is the where the camera is focusing. When we're using a camera that has an optical stabilizer, we can turn that vibration reduction off if we wanted to. Sometimes when you're shooting on tripods and you don't want any vibration, you can turn that off. If you're panning for sports, this would stabilize in the up and down orientation, but not side to side, so you can pan and there's no problem with that. Auto bracketing means we're going to give the camera permission to change a setting between shots. And when we come in here, it's turned off when it says 0 frames. So to turn this on, you would push to the left or right, and you could designate the number of frames, in this case, 9 frames. You can go left. Negative frames, you can see the shift in the exposure compensation bar. It's -3 frames, but it basically means 3 frames in the negative in the underexposure. So you can keep going to the left or right, and it gives us these different options. The number below it deals with the increment of exposure. So 5 frames, 1 stop of exposure between each. Push to the right, now it's 2 stops, and now we got 3 stops. So there's a limit in terms of how many stops you can get away with. And what this means is when we set this up for auto exposure, number of frames in the interval, let me just demonstrate. We'll just go 3 frames. The camera's going to change the exposure between each shot. So I push the shutter button down. Look at the exposure settings down here. You can see the shutter speed changing between each shot. And so now we have 3 different images in terms of brightness. That is what bracketing does, is the camera automatically changes the setting for us. When we come back in here, you can see that we have the ability to bracket for white balance and our auto light optimizer, or D-lighting, which is the contrast. Usually exposure is the most common setting that we change when we bracket. If we don't turn it back to 0, we lose a bunch of menu items. Wants us to be on 0, hit OK, and then we get these other guys coming back. Multiple exposure mode is kind of a fun mode. It allows us to stack images on top of each other as we're shooting. When you come in here, we'll turn it on for a single series, 3 shots. The overlay mode is asking, how do you want to blend them? Do you want to keep all the exposures? And do you want to preview this as you're shooting? So to demonstrate this, put a target up, and you can see the overlay of the previous image. And that's the idea of it, is it allows you to stack multiple images on top of each other. This works really good when you have a person standing in backlight, and then you take a picture of the person, and then you take a picture of some vegetation. It can be some, pretty cool effects. You can also do all this stuff in Photoshop if you're good with it. High dynamic range, I like to think of as auto bracketing, but it combines them in camera. It's very useful if you're shooting sunsets. You don't have a tripod and you want to get the sunset, but you also want to see the foreground. You don't have a lot of time. This would be the mode to use to try it. Again, we have the option between a single image or a series. And we also have the ability to save the raw files, which is really nice. A lot of HDR features and cameras don't do this. When we set it up this way and we take a picture, the camera is going to take multiple images, and then it's going to blend them together in such a way that we would retain a lot more information in terms of the highlights and the shadows and things of that nature. You can't really see it now because we're in, I'm shooting white blinds, but take it out for a sunset, try it out. It's a pretty cool feature. Interval timer shooting is just like it sounds like. We're telling the camera to take pictures at different intervals. We can choose a start time and date. Come in here, we tell it to start right now, or we can choose something specific. We would choose the interval, which is how much time we want the camera to wait between each shot. We'd have the number of shots. How many images do you want? Well, 100. Something that's cool about this is it would give you an approximate end time if you were to go that route. So if we were to come in here and choose 1100, it would give us the approximate time we would end. It's very nice, does the math for us. We can have the exposure be smoothed out. So when the exposure is changing, it could be a gradual change or shift. There's a way to do this in aperture priority mode. I think it's a little bit better. Probably too much information for this video. And then we can also have it shoot silently. So when that's all set up and you're ready to go, you would come in and press start, and the camera would take images at every interval. It's very nice for, if you're doing sunrises or sunsets, or if a flower is going to bloom, rapid change over time, that's when you would want to do it. Time-lapse movie is a little bit different in that it's going to create an in-camera movie from all those images once you're done. So you just got to kind of keep in mind, are you going to try to hang on to the stills, or do you want a movie? So we can control the intervals in minutes and seconds. How long do you want to be shooting for? Do you want to smooth out the exposures again, and you want it to be silent? When you get this all dialed in, it'll give you a preview of how long that video clip's going to be. When you're ready to go, you would come up to start, and you'd essentially be doing interval timer shooting, but in the end, you would end up with a video instead of stills. In our silent photography mode, we are going with an electronic shutter only. So if you come in here and select that, that's what you're going to get. You're going to see some artifacts if you're moving, if you're panning, if you're shooting in LED lights with a fast shutter speed. You're going to notice some problems. So this is why I don't use it a whole lot. I have shot as a photographer on movie sets and certain weddings, things of that nature where there's rules and you can't make any noise. That's when you'd want to flip it over to silent photography. So that is everything in the stills shooting tab. We're going to jump into the movie shooting menu. For the sake of time, we're going to focus on the most important things. There's a couple things in here that are pretty much exactly the same as we saw in the previous shooting menu. It just applies to video. So we can change, we can reset the menu, we can change the file name. File size and frame rate is pretty important. This is the best place to change it unless we're in the video mode. We can change it also right here. We can jump in. So these menus are the same, and I want to talk a little bit about what they are and what they mean. So frame rate are the number of images taken per second, and that's designated on the far right. So 30p means 30 frames per second. We also have 25, 24, and 120, which would be slow motion if we were to play it back at normal speed. So we're shooting at 4 times the normal rate, and when we play it back, it would be 4 times as slow. These other numbers in here deal with the resolution or the size of the frames that we're shooting. 3840 is essentially 4K. It's close enough to 4K. And if you have a memory card that's fast enough and a computer setup, for the files and editing, I would recommend shooting on 4K 30p most of the time. 24 frames per second is what we see when we go to the movie theater. So if you are shooting something that you want to look like film, you're going to come in and select 24p. YouTube stuff, almost all 30p, generally speaking, of course. And you're going to want to use a shutter speed that is twice what the frame rate is. So if I'm shooting at 30 frames per second, I would choose a shutter speed of 1/60th of a second to get a film-like look. If we're shooting at 24p, we would be at 1/50th of a second, and we would adjust our aperture and ISO accordingly. So I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you, but essentially this is the resolution, and these are the number of frames per second. 1920 by 1080 in terms of 60p or 30p. So this would be standard high definition. And then we also have the built-in slow motion modes that when we were to play it back, we would see it in slow motion. So the main things to remember are the resolution and then the frame rate. You'll notice that movie quality is grayed out. And when we're shooting on a high quality 4K, it's determined for us. If we were to choose a lower resolution, we could determine between normal or high quality. Movie file type, I almost always shoot on MOV. If you don't have plans to edit and just want to start sharing it, MP4. We have our ISO settings. Again, we can just come in here and determine the ISO, or if we want to go with auto ISO, which I don't really use auto ISO unless we're changing, lighting conditions rapidly, indoor to outdoor, really fast. We have our white balance. We have our set picture controls, all these different options in here. Flat is something we didn't see in the stills picture controls, and this reduces the contrast and the color. A lot of videographers use this in order to grade after the fact. And then we have these creative picture controls, these different looks, if you're into that. Kind of fun to play with. I don't consider them serious tools. We have the ability to set up our custom picture controls. Very common for videographers to do this. Again, we have active D lighting. All of this is applying to video. High ISO noise reduction. I'll leave mine on normal. Vignetting control will clean up the darkening in the corners if we have a compatible lens for it. Same with diffraction compensation. Auto distortion control is a bending in the look of the lens, usually created by wide angle lenses. We have flicker reduction. You're going to see the banding in LED lighting. We talked about using a certain shutter speed. 1/120th of a second or slower is typically going to allow us to shoot without that banding. We have our metering modes for video shooting. Release mode is essentially using the stills mode in the video mode. So if you wanted to take a frame, you wanted to export it, you could determine whether this was a single frame or a continuous frame. It may not look like anything's happening, but if you press and hold the shutter button down and go back and play, it's there. We have the different focusing modes for our video shooting. We've talked about these already. We have the cluster types for the video mode. We've talked about those as well. Optical vibration reduction is going to be dealing with lenses that have image stabilization built within them. We can turn them off or determine how they would be used. For example, talked about all this. Electronic vibration reduction is a little bit different in that we're giving the camera permission to take a smaller part of the image that we're shooting in order to stabilize it. So it'll go in and it'll look for movement and it'll try to correct it. Some cameras do this spectacularly well. I typically don't do it in camera because I want to know what's being cropped, what's being thrown away, and you can do it in post. But if you don't want to go through that extra step, you could turn this on as well. I just know that you're going to lose some resolution when you do it. Microphone sensitivity, this is something we're going to want to turn to manual. If you leave it on auto, what's going to happen is the gain or the boost of the audio signal will change depending on whether or not somebody is talking or not. And we get these wide fluctuations. It sounds terrible. So the thing we want to avoid are these red tick marks. Yellow is okay. Red is bad. When red happens, we're clipping out and we're losing a lot of the audio information. When you're in manual, what you can do is come in and turn this down. And this way, you'll never clip out. Once you adjust it, do a little test, check to make sure that's not red. Even when I'm snapping pretty hard, we get this really brief. I would probably shoot in this range. I never shoot in auto for the manual sensitivity. We can also turn the microphone off. The attenuator is sort of like a dampener. If it gets too loud, I've never had a lot of success with them. I think it sounds a little bit weird, but you can turn it on if you want. And then the frequency response, I recommend sticking with the wide range if you want to get ambient sound. If you want to stick mostly with the vocal range of humans, you can do this as well. Just make sure that you test it with the microphone that you're using before you shoot something important. And for that reason, I usually record the wide range and we clean up the sound in post. Wind noise reduction, I've never had any success with it, but if you wanted to turn it on and see if it would help limit wind noise, you could try it out. So that is the video shooting menu. Red tab, custom setting menu. This allows us to adjust a lot of the different custom settings. And when you come in here, obviously we can reset everything. We have these different colored letters that kind of are supposed to help us, differentiate between the different categories. So red, autofocus, real quick. We talked about the different focusing modes. Autofocus continuous priority selection is when we're in AFC mode, do we want the camera to prioritize taking the shot or focusing? I have mine set to focus because I like to have my shots in focus. We have the ability to determine eye detection or face detection or turn it off completely when we're using that wide autofocus mode. Do we want to have all of the focusing points available to us, or do we want every other focusing point? If you didn't like, scrolling while looking through the viewfinder, this might be something that you might want to do instead of having to go through every focusing point. Autofocus activation on. We talked about this for back button focusing. We'd come in here and set this up this way. Wraparound is something I definitely recommend leaving on. It allows you to jump from one side to the other by going in the opposite direction or from top to bottom quickly instead of, coming to this limit and needing to go back down. The focusing point options, let's see. Yes, we want manual focusing mode. We want the dynamic area autofocus assist. I would leave all of this on in here. Low light autofocus is turned on if you get into a very dark situation. So the built-in autofocus assist illuminator, it's a little light bulb right here. So if you're in a dark situation, that light will come on. It's not something that you always want on. So if you don't want to, attract attention to yourself, you would come in and turn that off. So then we come into the yellow, which deals with exposure and metering. I recommend 1/3 stop intervals for changing your exposure settings. Easy exposure compensation, I recommend leaving this off. Do it the way I showed you by pressing the exposure compensation button. Otherwise, it kind of gets confusing in terms of the controls. When we're using our center weighted metering mode, this is asking, do you want to look at a very small part of the viewfinder, or do you want to go with more of an average? Fine-tune optimal exposure allows us to tweak the metering modes. It's not something that I recommend messing with. especially if you're a beginner. So yes, so you can come in here and tweak these. The shutter release button auto exposure lock allows us to control whether the exposure is being locked with a halfway shutter button depression or how it responds in a burst mode. So if you're doing continuous shooting, if you just turn this to off, it's going to meter every time we push the shutter button down all the way. So this is asking, when do we want to lock the exposure so it doesn't change? If we come in here and we turn this on, a halfway shutter button depression will lock your exposure. Otherwise, it will not. Self timer. So we can go with 10 seconds, 5 seconds, 2 seconds, 20 seconds. So if you're using a timer, you can come in here and determine it. How many shots do you want to take at the end of the timer? I think we can go from 1 to 9. How long do you want to wait between each of those shots if you have multiple images? And our power off delay. So how soon do you want the camera to turn off during playback, for example, or in your menus? I've turned these all up because I'm teaching right now and I don't like the camera turning off. But your standby timer is the one that's going to shut the camera off if you're not using it. Typically 1 to 5 minutes is a good place to start. Coming into D, which is shooting and display, the continuous low burst is how many frames per second we want on that low burst setting. So we can go from 1 to 4. How many images do we want the camera to take before it turns off? So we're limited to 100. And if we were to do a full burst, when we got to 100, the camera would stop. I think the idea on this is a safety mechanism. So if we bump it in our camera bag, it won't shoot and burn the battery out or your shutter or whatever. Looking at some of these other guys in here, I don't recommend limiting the area, but if we wanted to turn some of those off, we could, just to leave the DX mode available. Sure. Save changes. Coming down, we have the file number sequence. This has to deal when replacing a memory card. If it's on, it will be the next file. If you come in and reset, it will start from 0001 again. Apply settings to live view is like exposure preview, color balance preview. I totally recommend leaving this on. For beginners, it allows them to preview the shot before they take it. We also have the ability to do framing and grid displays. So if we wanted to have an overlay, we could. There it is. It wouldn't be on the image when you take the picture. It's just, if you need some guidelines for shooting buildings, for example, you wanted to line everything up to be straight. Turn that to off. Peaking highlights is something that we would use for focusing. So if we turn this all the way up to high and we come in to red, you can see that we get this overlay. It's very useful when you're using manual focus. It's not always precise, but it'll show you the area of high contrast and tell us, hey, this should be in focus. You can see that red outline. Pretty nice for certain types of video shooting. We can choose different colors, yellow, blue, white. I don't really use white because it gets confusing when we're dealing with highlights, but red and blue really stand out pretty well, or we can turn it off. This is something that typically we would expect to see in manual focus. So if we come back out, we don't see it. So just know that in order to see peaking, we have to be in manual focus. View all in continuous mode. When we're in a burst mode and we want to see our display and everything in it, you're going to want to leave that turned on. If you turn it off, you will not get that same preview. You won't get all that information that we're getting when it's on. Flash sync speed, the easiest way to think of this is the maximum shutter speed that you want to use when you're using flash. And you'll notice that when you pop the flash up, it won't let you set a shutter speed faster than whatever is set in the menu here. Flash shutter speed is the minimum shutter speed. So we're essentially setting a range between these two shutter speeds. Exposure compensation for flash, the idea on this is that if we set our exposure compensation, do you want it to apply to flash as well? Or do you want it to only apply to the background? In the beginning, this first option is what I would recommend. When we are using flash and we have auto ISO turned on, do you want it to apply to the background light only, which is the ambient light, or both the ambient and the flash? We can change the bracketing order. MTR is an even exposure, metered light, under, over. This changes the order of the brightness as you shoot in a bracketing mode. And then we can come in and customize our eye menu. So if you remember, when we press the I button, we have these 12 different menu options. If we come into customize eye menu, We can come in and change each one of these depending on what we want. Some of these are pretty good, but if we came in here and hit the I button, you would see a whole list of things to choose from. In the beginning, I wouldn't recommend doing that, but as you become more and more advanced, it's definitely something you're going to want to check out. Custom controls means that in the shooting mode, we can determine how our custom buttons work. We have two of them near where our right ring finger would rest. Right now, it's set up to be our white balance button, but customization is great if you find yourself changing certain settings all the time. And then when we play the images back, we have the auto exposure lock button and the OK button. The command dials, the rotating wheels, are seen differently than the buttons, and this allows us to customize how they rotate, how they change menu items, playback if you wanted to. I think the touchscreen's it's a lot more simple. But if you wanted to customize your rotating wheels, you could do that here. Release button to use dial. An example would be the exposure compensation indicator is that when we push this button down, we have to hold it down and rotate. That feature would allow us to release it and then change it. I think it's easier holding it down, but you might want to change it. We can also reverse the indicators of our exposure compensation bar if you want. By default, we have our underexposure on the left, but if we wanted to have our overexposure on the left, we could change it here. Pretty difficult to see, but these are different purples. And so we're getting into the movie menu, G. It's a darker purple. And this is allowing us to custom the I menu for movies. So this is great because we can have an I menu for still shooting and we can have an I menu for video shooting. And those are different features because, for example, you might want to access your audio levels, right? Well, that's something specific to movie shooting, and that would be great to customize that menu according to movie shooting. Same basic idea. There it is. We have the ability to customize our buttons for movie shooting. Same idea. And then we can change the speed in the tracking of our autofocus for movie shooting as well. So if it's moving too slow and you want to speed it up, you can come in here and tweak it. Probably a good idea to do some tests if this is for a serious shoot, serious work. Always do tests. If you're doing commercial work, you're getting paid. I always do a set of tests so I know exactly the settings that I want before I actually do the shoot. Highlight display is basically zebras. When we overexpose something, we'll get these marching ants, and you'll notice that it's turned off right now. This stuff will drive you crazy if you don't know, exactly what setting in your menu that was turned on that's preventing it. In this case, it's peaking. So we need to come in and turn our peaking off. You can't have peaking and highlight display together. So we'll just come in here and turn that off. There it is. It's turned on. We can, decide which pattern we want. We can determine the threshold. 255 is pure white. So we turn that on. So once this is set up, make sure you're on video mode. This doesn't display in stills mode. And we can come in and we'll just bump the ISO up so you can see this. There it is. We have our little zebra displays. So that's an overview of the custom setting menu. It's all your custom controls. So the orange menu is the setup menu. There's lots of things that are pretty straightforward in here. Format memory card. It's going to erase everything. Always make sure you have two backups before you erase your memory card. I typically like to have a hard drive copy here or two plus one on the internet. It's 3 copies. My assistant lives in a different part of the country, has his backup. So we usually have multiple copies of the files, but get into a workflow where you're clearing your card off every time you put it back into your camera because you have 2 extra copies. Save user settings has to do with the U1 and the U2 modes on our mode dial. So you set the camera up exactly the way you want it for a particular type of shooting. You would come in here and you would select which position you want to save it to, and the camera would remember those settings. It's very useful if you do different types of shootings, say sport shooting and portrait photography, and you do them often and you don't want to have to redial all those camera settings in. You can also reset the U1 and U2. Language, hopefully it's English if you're watching this video, but there's other languages in here if you speak one of them. Time zone and date, pretty straightforward. We can pick our time zone, the date, month, all that good stuff. Monitor brightness refers to the brightness of the back monitor. Sometimes if you go outside and it's a bright sunny day, it may not be bright enough. You have to turn it up, turn it down. We can also change the brightness and the color balance of our EVF, and this is where it's done. It's going to ask you to look through the viewfinder and check the color there as you do it. Information display. So we have dark on light. If you remember the Let's come to the display here so I can show you. So we have dark letters on a white background. If you're not a fan of that, you can come to white on dark. There it is, a little bit harder to see. Autofocus fine tune is something I would not recommend doing if you're a pure beginner. This allows us to change the front and back focus of certain lenses, and it's a little tricky sometimes. There's a program called Focal made by a company named Rikon. So it's Reikan Focal. And I think this works better with that software because you plug into a computer and it's automated and it'll tell you exactly what to do. But this is something that's more advanced if you're shooting a lot and you notice your lens, certain lenses are front focusing or back focusing, you can adjust it. Dust delete data, or the image dust off reference photo, allows us to designate an image where you're seeing sensor dust. This is a software solution. I don't recommend doing it. I recommend checking your sensor and making sure it's clean before shoots so you don't have to go in and clean all these images up. Back in the day when I was first getting started, I remember this portrait shoot that I did and I had sensor dust on every image and we had to go in manually and clean it up and it was a nightmare. So always clean your sensor before an important shoot, check it to make sure it's okay, minimize the amount of time that you're exposing your sensor to the elements, make those changes quickly. Image comment and copyright information allow us to embed EXIF data into the files so we can actually put our name into the copyright data. So every image would have your copyright, your photography name, maybe your company name embedded into the image. Beep options is the sound. So if you want to hear sound as you're operating the camera, you would come in here. I've had mine turned off. It's a very faint sound. You can kind of hear it. Touch controls is the back monitor as you're interfacing with it. Definitely recommend leaving it on. Self portrait mode means that when you flip the monitor around and you're getting ready to take a picture, you would have certain options and controls available. And we can see that basically when we flip the monitor around, all the other buttons and controls become disabled with the exception of the shutter release. HDMI out. This is very useful if you are doing high-end video recording to an external monitor and you're trying to capture ProRes, for example. All of these guys in here are essentially the resolutions that we can determine to tell what kind of signal to put out. Also works if you're playing back onto a television, for example, and you want to change the resolution here. A lot of the auto settings are set up to, just handle it for you so you don't have to worry about those kinds of things. Location data display, pretty sure that this is working with a smartphone that's embedding information into our images. It's turned off right now. Hopefully I can show you the Wi-Fi connection and how to use it with a smartphone. This is gonna be a long video. I'm trying to get through all this stuff. Airplane mode turns off the Wi-Fi signal, basically puts it into a safe mode. You're familiar with that if you have a smartphone. Connect to smart device. We can connect to PC, sometimes a little bit trickier. There's a wireless remote that we have some options to control. We can assign different buttons on it. It's the ML-L7. We have some conformity logos and markings. Basically says that this is a safe product to use that's required by certain countries. We have our energy saving mode, which essentially means that when we're not using the camera, it'll turn off certain features to try to save the battery. Slot empty release lock means that if you do not have a memory card, it will not allow you to take a picture. Some people like this because they forget about putting memory cards in and they think it's recording to the camera somewhere. Reset all settings will do just that. It'll reset everything that you've changed in the camera and put it back to the default factory settings. Firmware refers to the software that manages the operation of the camera body as well as the lens. And typically after a camera comes out, there's a couple bugs. Nikon will make an announcement and say, hey, this firmware will fix this. It's 1.01 or 1.02 or 2.0 or whatever it is. Firmware version allows us to come in and see which versions we have on the camera to know if we need to update or not. So that is the setup menu. Now we're coming into the retouch menu. I don't like spending a lot of time on this because the idea is that you're going to be able to edit your images from the back monitor. And I always edit my images from a computer monitor because I can see it better and know what I want to do. There's some fun things in here. We have some raw processing. We can trim, crop the image down a little bit. We can resize it, add certain settings, straighten it. It's a nice idea. but it's something that I've never used. And for beginners, what I would recommend is get it onto a computer. There's some free softwares now. It doesn't have to be Photoshop. Get into the habit of inspecting your images on a full monitor and taking a look at them. But if you had nothing else and you wanted to, edit an image and maybe transfer it by Wi-Fi, you could do it through here. So take a look at it when you get a chance. It's something you should be familiar with that you have available. So that is the purple menu, Retouch. I'm not going to spend any time on it. My menu is awesome because it allows us to access, close to the 100 items that we've gone through, and it puts it to its own specific tab so we don't have to go hunting for it every single time we're looking for something. You are going to find out that there are certain menu items that you are going to use over and over and over again, and the rest you're not. So those are the ones you should put in your My Menu. There's two ways we can do this. We can choose the tab for My Menu. This is where we customize it, or we can come to recent settings and the camera will display the last menu items you accessed. So if you access the same ones over and over again, they're always going to be in recent settings. I like the My Menu one a little bit better because we can just designate, hey, we're going to come into the shooting menu and let's find our ISO settings. So if you're changing your auto ISO a lot, you don't want to go to that position in the menu, no problem. We could remove items. We can change the order if we wanted to. Let's go movie shooting menu and microphone sensitivity. That's a good one. So now our My Menu has our stills ISO sensitivity settings and our microphone sensitivity. And we could just jump to this gray tab and access them. So that's an overview of the Deep Menu system. I know there's a lot of information in there, and I hope you enjoyed it. I wanted to walk you through connecting to the SnapBridge app. This is a smartphone app that you'd have to download from the App Store. I'm going to be demonstrating on the iPhone 10. And I have a love-hate relationship with this app. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I know that Nikon has been updating it. They issued a firmware update recently to include the Z50, so it should operate, it should work, but I've had varying experiences. The idea on this is that we're going to send a Wi-Fi signal from the camera that we are going to connect to on our smartphone. And sometimes this is complicated and sometimes it's a little easier, just really depends. So we're going to come into our orange tab. We're going to come down to our connect to smartphone. So it's asking, do you want to pair with Bluetooth? We can try it. I honestly have a better time going with a Wi-Fi connection. So we're going to select establish Wi-Fi connection. So here comes the signal. It's putting the signal out and it's saying, here is your secure ID, password, all this stuff. So I have to scroll over to our Wi-Fi settings. So my Wi-Fi is connected to my home signal right now. And we should see it on the list. Here it is. There's the Z50. We're going to select that. It's asking for a password. Nikon had some problems in the past with unsecured Wi-Fi connection settings. So on my smartphone, I'm confirming that I'm connected to the Z50. Coming back to my SnapBridge app, opening it. And if you're connected to the camera, they're going to communicate, they should talk. And this is the kind of stuff that drives me crazy because now it's saying, no, there's no connection. Let's come back and check it. Yeah, it went back to my other one and we lost the password. So this is the kind of thing that drives me crazy. So now we're back connected. We're going to refresh this. I've already put the password in once. It should remember it. It has major connectivity problems. I know we're still open because it's asking to close it. So we're in Wi-Fi mode. The most useful way to use this app, I believe, is remote photography. And essentially what it's doing is it's allowing us to shoot remotely on our smartphone. The distance is about 20 to 25 feet, depending on how strong your signal is or interference. And we have a number of interesting settings here. We can change our shutter speed. We can change our aperture, all remotely. We can change our exposure compensation. We want to make it brighter or darker. I'm in manual mode, so it's not changing anything. We can take the picture. There it goes. We can use the touch screen to focus. We can change our ISO. That should make it brighter if we're on manual mode. We can change our white balance if we wanted to. We have some self timers. If we wanted to turn that on, we could turn a self timer on. Live view is giving us a preview exposure. We can change the size of the files. I recommend 2 megapixels if you're going to be, just posting them online or whatever, but we can also download the original format in terms of the size of JPEG, basically saying it won't allow us to download raw images. This is telling us the size of the image that we're downloading to the smartphone, number of shots remaining on our memory card, battery life, the mode we're shooting on. Something that's I'm a little surprised that it's not letting me change my ISO. Oh, there it goes. Okay, so it wants it to be yellow. You got to double tap it, but it wants this ISO to be yellow. Let's take a look at the video shooting stuff. It's overexposed right now. Will it let us change our exposure settings? Doesn't look like it. So that's could be a limitation of the video shooting mode, is that you'd have to dial in the settings on the camera. Yeah, it doesn't want to let us out to do that. But it would start and stop video recording here, stop it here, and then I wonder if it allows us to download the video. Sometimes you can download the video, sometimes not. The interesting thing about this is from Christmas last year. I was at some friend's house. We took some pictures with the Z6, I think, and it's memorized into the app. So you can download your images to your smartphone, obviously, trying to get the EXIF data. Down here on the bottom, we can delete the image. It has gotten better. With all the quirks and problems that we're having with this, I can honestly say this has improved recently. It used to just kick you out or disconnect you. It was a nightmare. We have the ability to preview the images. So again, from Christmas, from a while, this is from the D850 a couple years ago. So the app kind of remembers any images that you download. This is a model we went out to test the camera. There's a cloud service that you can connect with. That is the SnapBridge app, how to connect, some of the basic features using remote photography, downloading images, things of that nature. Check it out. When you're done with it, it's going to ask, do you want to switch to Bluetooth pairing? I typically almost always connect with Wi-Fi because I don't like Bluetooth pairing. Sometimes it's inconsistent and I seem to have fewer problems with Wi-Fi. But in any event, that is how you connect with the smartphone to our Nikon Z50. Before we get into the lens recommendations, I have to explain what a crop factor is and why it's important. Because we're shooting with a smaller sensor than a 35mm frame of film, our camera has a crop factor of 1.5. What does that mean? Basically means that when we take a lens and put it onto our camera, it is going to behave as if it was zoomed in just a little bit. And that factor, if we were to multiply it on the focal length, will give us the equivalent if this was a full frame camera. So if we have a 100mm lens and we're putting it on our camera, it would behave as a 150mm lens. That's something really important to keep in mind as you select and use lenses on the Z50. At the time of this recording, there are only 2 native APS-C Z-mount lenses. The first, the 16-50, is going to behave like a 24 to 75mm lens. It is an extremely useful focal length. So I see the 16-50 as a must-have lens. Absolutely, positively, it is going to give you a very compact, small shooting package that you will find extremely versatile. Now, the other lens that's available right now is the 50-250, which is going to give you greater zoom capabilities. There's also a Z-mount 50mm 1.8 native mount. When we're talking about putting a lens directly onto the camera, it tends to have an advantage when it comes to focusing. That said, there is also an FTZ adapter, which is really standing for an F-mount to a Z-mount adapter that will allow you to use existing F-mount Nikon lenses on our Z50. I believe that adapter is a must-have if you have existing Nikon lenses. You're going to be able to adapt over and use those lenses for fast action sports shooting. Not the best, but pretty much everything else, landscapes, portrait, street shooting, it works great. If you have those existing lenses, or if you're on a budget, you want to look at something like a 50mm 1.8 as a portrait lens, that's pretty cheap, inexpensive way to go about it. $200 lens, adapt it over, and you'll be in business for portraits with a wide aperture glass. And the prices go up from there. After your camera and your lenses, you are definitely going to want to get a tripod. The word of warning I give is try to avoid the flimsy video sideways tilting head tripods that you get at Walmart for 60 bucks. They're complete junk. Invest just a little bit of extra money and you can get a really good functionality tripod that will last you for years. We sell one on our website for just under $90. and they go up from there. I mean, you can spend hundreds of dollars on a tripod. Typically, what I tell pure beginners is if they don't know how interested or how much they're going to do, get good quality, less expensive gear. And as they get more involved in photography, if they continue to do it, they're going to upgrade. If you do any kind of video work, you are going to want to get an external microphone. My friends and I have done a ton of research on microphones, testing very expensive ones, and I actually ended up going out and manufacturing my own microphone. Bang for your buck. I believe it is the best quality microphone on the market today. I'll put that link in the description. It has everything you need for a starting shotgun microphone for your camera. At some point, you are going to become interested in strobe work, talking about a flash. And the flash that I recommend, the external flash, which is going to give you a lot more firepower, is the TT685N. It's just over $100. You can also get an off-camera transmitter for another 50 or 60. And usually in those crash courses, in the everything else crash course, I will demonstrate how to use a flash and how it works and the basics of lighting and things of that nature. In any event, I hope you enjoyed that free tutorial on the Nikon Z50. Again, thank you to Lens2Go for supporting the education on YouTube. If you guys need a camera or a lens, Maven 10 will save you 10% at checkout. Like I said, they're really fast, they're really good. I love working with them. If you enjoyed your free tutorial on the Nikon Z50 and you want to learn everything else about your camera, check out my Everything Else crash course. I'll put that link in the description. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.